Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. And we start with a new offensive in the fight for control of the Republican Party. A group of more than 100 Republicans wants the GOP to make major reforms and pull away from former President Donald Trump. It listed its demands in a public letter released on Thursday. Among the group members, former governors and members of Congress, and one of its leaders, Miles Taylor, an IU grad and former top Homeland Security official who was the author of Anonymous.
We welcome in Miles Taylor now. Miles, thanks for being with us. I want to start with, why did you put this letter out now?
Well, it's a great question. Actually, Brooke, the story goes back a few months. The weeks after the January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C., me and a number of concerned Republicans pulled together a group of about 150 or 200 prominent GOP leaders and ex-GOP leaders to talk about where we take the party next. And, frankly, we came to the conclusion that if we didn't band together, the pro-democracy movement would fracture, and we would see something like that happen again. Now, this week, with Liz Cheney's ouster from GOP leadership here in Washington, D.C. in the House of Representatives, we felt like that was the perfect time to send a signal that there are a group of rational Republicans who want to reform the party and make sure that we move in a more positive direction.
How do you do that with such a fractured party right now? Do you believe the Republican Party can be saved at this point?
Well, look, that's the experiment that we want to undertake. I mean, this group of people is a serious group. I mean, we include among our ranks Michael Steele, the former chairman of the Republican Party, multiple former Republican governors, senators, congressmen, thought leaders. And what we want to do is, first and foremost, come to the defense of those who are the rational ones in the Republican Party. Two, we want to go after the radicals within the Republican Party, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world and the elected representatives that have forsaken their oaths to the Constitution, in our view. And number three, we want to recruit, incubate, and accelerate pragmatic candidates in key races around the country. We want the GOP to go back to a party that supported free minds, free markets, free people, and wasn't trying to go against the Constitution and undermine the democratic process. So we're going to be actively involved in races around the country in the years to come. This
sounds to me like a third party. Can a third party succeed, especially in a place like Indiana?
Well, look, we would prefer that it not be that. I mean, the starting point is, let's try to reform the GOP. But if we can't reform it, we're going to replace it. And that's a big question mark, Brooke, because the third parties have never been successful here in the United States. But we may be getting to the point where there's no other option. Now, it's my hope that we have a healthy and prosperous and decent Republican Party that takes the place of what's happened to the GOP in terms of the corrupting sort of radical influences that have overtaken the party. But if that doesn't happen, we're going to explore those alternatives. And there are some places in the United States where the laws are favorable towards third parties emerging. But there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done to make our democracy more free, more open, and more competitive.
Currently, if you could label it, what is the current Republican Party? The conservative party or the party of Trump?
It's neither. It's the Titanic, right? It's a sinking ship, and it's one that has got some fatal flaws within it. Now, unlike the Titanic, we think we can probably patch this thing up, but that's the big test we're going to undertake over the next few years. And the data shows that Americans are desperate for this to happen. Pew just came out with a survey a few weeks ago that showed that half of Americans now say they're neither a Democrat or Republican. They're a political independent. What that tells us is that people are dissatisfied with both of the big parties. They want alternatives and they want responsiveness to their demands. That's what we've got to do. We've got to reboot a GOP that's responsive to people's demands. And if it's not, then we need to present a more hopeful alternative for the American people.
Miles, can you explain to our viewers, what are the powers that are having a say within this quote unquote civil war inside the Republican Party and frankly the Democratic Party? But where are the fractures coming from?
Yeah, I think the fractures, frankly, Brooke, are around Donald Trump and his influence. But it's not just around Trump himself. It's about a commitment to founding ideals. There was a lot of concern among Republicans, even those who voted for Donald Trump after the January 6th insurrection, that our party was laying credence to this notion, this massive conspiracy theory that the election was stolen. I can tell you, Brooke, firsthand, I'm one of the people who oversaw election security when I was chief of staff of the Department of Homeland Security. We put extensive efforts in place to protect this election. This was one of the most secure elections in American history. The election was not stolen, but the perpetuation of that lie has ripped the fabric of our republic apart, and at the same time has ripped the has ripped the Republican Party apart, and that's what we're working to reconcile.
You mentioned President Trump, and you've seen the statement from him attacking you personally, calling the group a bunch of rhinos and losers. How do you respond to him?
Well, frankly, Brooke, someone asked me that question earlier today and said, what do you think about Donald Trump's statement? My answer is, I don't.
Are you worried about the 2022 elections?
Look, I'm worried that if we don't get it right, if we don't have principled pragmatists that win these races, if the GOP keeps running radicals and getting radicals elected, then yeah, I'm pretty worried about it. And look, I'm a lifelong Republican, with a brief exception of a period when I was younger, but I want to see the Republican Party go back to normal. If it doesn't, though, this gives me a lot of concern about what might happen in 2024, or more specifically, January 2025, when, whether it's a Democrat or Republican that gets elected, we might have a Republican majority in the House that could decide to certify or not certify the election results. That's a situation we don't want to get in here in the United States. We should be a democratic republic, not a banana republic, one that every 4 years isn't sure whether an election was legitimate or illegitimate. That's what worries me. We've got to excise those elements out of the Republican Party. And if we don't, like I said, we need a third way.
Miles Taylor, thanks so much for your insight today.
Thanks, Brooke.
Fascinating conversation coming up. State lawmakers override Governor Eric Holcomb again. A top House Republican explains why and the message he says it sends to local government leaders. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. Republican Indiana lawmakers have dealt another rebuke to Governor Eric Holcomb. The House and Senate overwhelmingly overrode the governor's veto of Senate Bill 5. The bill prohibits health officials from imposing tougher emergency restrictions than the state unless a city council or a county commission approves them. It's the third time this year the Republican-led General Assembly has reversed a Holcomb veto.
We now welcome in Representative Matt Lehman, the majority leader in the Indiana House of Representatives. So let's start with Monday's veto override vote. Why the override? Why require local elected leaders to sign off on health restrictions?
Well, I think, first of all, what you saw happening throughout the pandemic was a reach out from a lot of people who said, is there a way we can involve more local elected officials into this? Because all health officers in the state of Indiana, whether they're city or county, are appointed by a health board, accountable not to an elected body, but to basically that health board. And so we really found that, again, no one expected a 14-month pandemic. But during that time, should there be a check and a balance between that unchecked authority of a local health officer and the duly elected people, the legislative branch, you'd call it, of those counties? And that was the genesis of Senate Bill 5. The governor obviously didn't feel that was the necessary path and vetoed it. We still feel it's the right path, and that's why we had the override on Monday.
Well, speaking of Senate Bill 5, several health leaders from around the state said that Senate Bill 5 makes their jobs harder and would make it more difficult for them to respond to future emergencies. What do you think about that?
Well, I would disagree. I think you saw what happened in Marion County with Indianapolis. I mean, I think one of the things we heard is how quickly Marion County said, well, even with the path is there, and that is, if you want to be more stringent than the state, you just have to have that authority or that authorization. And they immediately, upon our override, within hours, reinstated their mask mandate and their capacity limits, and that's fine. That's what they have a right to do. So I don't think it was quite the hiccup people thought it was going to be, because I think you saw Indianapolis respond to it the way the bill was intended to work, and other areas that's done the same thing.
This is the third veto override this session. Is there a power struggle between lawmakers and Governor Holcomb, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so at all. I think what you're seeing is really two of those three dealt with during the time of a pandemic. And so I think no one, including the executive branch and Governor Holcomb, who I think has done a good job, saw what we were going to be getting into over that 14-month period. And so it really came down to just trying to find a path to where the legislative branch said we need to be maybe a little more part of these decisions going forward. I'm not looking at anything retroactively. I'm looking at the future of setting a template for people in these seats years from now to say, hey, what do we do when there's an issue? Should there be this check and a balance? I think there should. Governor disagreed. We're going to disagree, but we did what I think is right by the people when it comes to good public policy.
Does talk of the veto overrides threaten to overshadow what lawmakers were able to accomplish with this new 2-year budget?
No, I don't think so. I think in some venues there might be people who that'll be their focus. But I was just at an event today where the discussion didn't even involve either one of those bills. It dealt with what we say is one of the best budgets India has passed, with the ability to build a reserve, huge investment in public education. So all the things that were positive we did this session with some of the with House Bill 1006 with Representative Sturwald on the police reforms. Those are all very positive things that most people are still going to focus on. And I really think most people will focus on those and not so much the issue of the veto override.
We are seeing more federal money become available to Indiana for coronavirus relief. How should that money be spent?
Well, as a conservative, I believe you do the things that are one time. It's a one-time, found money. It's like getting a check from, Uncle Eddie's estate. What can you do to make an investment in moving forward? And so long-term investments that are going to require that long-term dollar needs to be through the budgetary process. I think Indiana did the right thing. We took $1 billion and paid off debt. I think that really helps the future, especially if we had another time when there's a bit of a downturn. You're going to have that ability now to have some of that cash that would have been going to pay interest, now pay projects that need to be paid. So I think we did look at a lot of one-time things, road funding, some of the infrastructure projects, the $250 million into rural broadband. As someone from a rural district, I think that's fantastic. Those are all great investments moving forward.
Well, Representative, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. We do appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
And we also want to share this with you. This is from the president of the Indiana State Association of County and City Health Officials. Dr. Jeremy Adler says they're disappointed with the override and that Indiana's local public health officials must now face even more hurdles, he says, to protect the health and safety of their communities. The impact will be immediate and unnecessary lives will be lost. We simply cannot understand why our own legislators, he goes on to say, would choose to put more Hoosiers in harm's way. Coming up, our political experts talk the veto override and the struggle at the top of the GOP. That's next on All Indiana Politics. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday as we welcome back Republican Pete Seat and Democrat Drew Anderson. Gentlemen, good to see you both. Let's get rolling here on a Sunday. We talked with Indiana native Miles Taylor. He's part of that group that says that it wants to reform the GOP or they'll form a third party. Pete, I'll start with you on this one. Is this just a bunch of noise or is this a serious push for party changes?
Well, I don't like speaking ill of a fellow Hoosier, but let's be honest. Anonymous should keep calling himself Anonymous because he is completely and entirely irrelevant. This group that he helped put together is the Lincoln Project by another name. I looked through the list and there are people I consider personal friends. I don't let politics get in the way of our friendships, but they were part of the Lincoln Project. They were part of other anti-Trump, pro-Biden groups, and they just keep recycling themselves, trying to stay relevant in a world in which they are irrelevant. And I'm not going to sit here and listen to former Republicans try and tell the Republican Party that we are not strong and that we need to do anything differently. Look in Indiana, we are extremely strong in Indiana and across the country because we have responsible leadership at every level. And so these guys are just a bunch of noise.
Drew, your response, because he's not the only one saying this, we also saw Liz Cheney making similar statements the past couple of weeks.
You know what? I feel bad for the Republican Party because their values used to, set on local government. And now it just feels like that they are now subscribing to what is amounting to a fan club. And it's because this kind of fan club is about extreme partisanship. And it's why they voted against the American Rescue Plan that's helping Indiana put COVID in the rearview mirror. And it's again, and essentially they are saying no to anything that Donald Trump doesn't like. And that's not a political party. And that's not how stuff gets done. And, Republicans could do what they want, while Democrats, we're going to keep celebrating this American Rescue Plan.
Pete, is that fair to say about Republicans being beholden to the former president?
We're opposed to a president who is currently in the Oval Office who speaks like a moderate and governs like a liberal progressive. Joe Biden is good at putting on this aw shucks Uncle Joe face, but at the end of the day, what he is trying to enact is liberal policies supported by Bernie Sanders, AOC, Kamala Harris, and the rest. That's what Joe Biden is doing. Look at the quote unquote infrastructure plan that barely has any actual infrastructure spending in it. They are trying to enact their dream pet projects that they've been trying to enact for decades under the guise of infrastructure, using COVID as their tool to do that.
I mean, to respond to Pete, I mean, he's saying that Biden's all liberal and stuff, but 63% of Americans approve of the job that he's doing. And 71% of Americans, including 47% of Republicans, actually agree with Biden's pandemic response. And so even when it comes to this jobs plan that's coming up, last time I checked, broadband, roads and bridges, and, building out infrastructure for the veterans VA system, those are common sense policies. So it's a shame that my friend on the other side is, labeling that as super liberal, because that's just getting stuff done.
Pete, want to respond to that quickly? I want to move on to another topic.
Yeah, again, Joe Biden is very good. I'll give him credit for speaking like a moderate. But when we can coalesce and start talking about the disaster that is his policies, those polling numbers are going to change rather quickly.
Okay, gentlemen, let's move on to this one. We'll talk about the veto override on local emergency health restrictions. Pete, does the city-county council's vote this week prove lawmakers are right that the bill doesn't slow down local governments?
Well, from the governor's perspective, he thinks that he and future governors should have the flexibility and ability to respond to evolving emergency situations without getting bogged down by process. And of course, the legislators, as we heard from Representative Lehman, think that they should be included in statewide conversations, and that elected officials like county commissioners should be involved at the local level as opposed to unelected health officials. So this has been a debate that we've seen play out over the last several months. We'll likely see it play out in the courts when it comes to the emergency orders in the coming months. But this could very well be a sign, to your point, that local officials are going to make the decisions that they believe, whether you agree with the city county council decision or not, that they believe are in the best interest of their constituents.
And Drew, I have less than a minute left. Republicans already pushing the Democratic Council to act on ending the mask mandate here in Marion County.
I mean, what I will say is that Marion County should do what's best for them, because they know their county and they know how to protect their citizens. I will say at the end of the day that what Pete Seat was describing in his answer just now was just, again, the bitter civil war that his party is, experiencing. And they're just showing that they don't believe that Governor Holcomb is relevant at all. And it's, again, it makes you feel bad because the Republican Party simply has lost their identity, has lost their way. But meanwhile, Democrats, we're just going to keep getting to work.
All right, we'll leave it there. Pete, Drew, always good to see you. Thank you for taking some time.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
Take All Indiana Politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
Coming up this morning on All Indiana Politics, is the Republican Party the political equivalent of the Titanic? One group of Republicans led by an Indiana native says yes, and he's leading a group demanding major reforms to the GOP. We'll talk to him, plus state lawmakers override the governor again. We talk all that and Liz Cheney at 9:30 on All Indiana Politics, only on Wish TV.